Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to be introducing you to your first PHP script, a script called Hello World.php that is a mixture of PHP code and HTML and outputs a simple HTML message. So what specifically are we going to cover in today's lesson? First of all, we're going to cover how a PHP file gets converted to HTML. We know that on our web server, when we request a PHP file, Apache invokes the PHP interpreter to process it, and the PHP interpreter processes the file, generates HTML, sends it back to the Apache, who sends it back to the client. We're going to talk a little bit more about that process. We're also going to introduce the concept of PHP delimiters, which are also known as PHP opening and closing tags, and we're going to have another homework challenge to discuss. So PHP to HTML, how does that work? Well, first of all, as mentioned, we know that when a PHP page is requested, the PHP interpreter is invoked by Apache. And basically from an input-output point of view, the PHP takes a text file as input and generates some sort of output. Now PHP is a general scripting language, so it always is going to take a text file as an input. Because it's not just used in the web, it doesn't always generate HTML output. It can generate things like PDFs and images, other kinds of text files like XML. However, for this course, because it's a web-based course, we're going to be dealing with text files that have the .php extension and are a combination of both HTML and PHP code. And the PHP interpreter is going to process these files, and on the other end it's going to generate HTML output. Essentially it's going to be generating HTML dynamically on the fly. So how does PHP know when it receives a .php file as its input what's PHP code and what's HTML? And the answer is in what are known as PHP delimiters, also called opening and closing PHP tags. And basically these are special tags that inform the PHP interpreter that it's about to interpret some PHP code. And the pair of tags are right here. This one is the opening PHP tag. It's a less than sign followed immediately by a question mark, followed immediately by the lowercase characters PHP. And the closing tag is simply a question mark followed by a greater than sign. So basically anything the PHP interpreter encounters between these two tags is going to treat as code. Now everything outside of those tags, PHP just treats as text and it simply passes it to output. So as PHP processes your file, if it encounters HTML, it simply passes it along to output. Once it reaches a group of PHP delimiters, it executes any code in there, and if there's output to be generated, adds it to the output it's already passed along. When it exits out of the PHP code snippet, then it goes ahead and passes on any more HTML or other text it finds until it reaches the end of the file. Now, when entering PHP mode, or when a PHP interpreter encounters a PHP opening tag, that's called escaping from HTML, and you're entering into PHP mode. Once the closing delimiter is reached, the ending PHP tag, you're said to be returning to HTML mode. And within any single PHP file, you can intermingle PHP code and HTML as often as desired. So you can basically start off in HTML, process a little PHP code, go back to HTML, output something, go back into PHP code, do a little processing, and so forth as often as needed throughout your file. So let's actually take a look at our first PHP file called hello world.php. So this is hello world.php. We've opened it up in our text editor, PSPad, which we installed in the last lesson. And you can see that we have some simple HTML tags, a body and HTML opening and closing HTML and body tags. And then we can see the PHP opening and closing tags or delimiters that we had just talked about. And with inside the PHP delimiters, everything that PHP finds, it executes as code. And so basically there's one line of code within these PHP tags, and it's an echo, what's known as an echo statement. And an echo statement simply outputs any text after the echo statement that's between a pair of quotation marks and adds that to the output. And the way you do that, so you write echo and then a space, your text you'd like to output. In this case, it's an HTML header tag with some the hello world message, and then after the quotation ends, you finish it off with a semicolon. So when PHP processes this file, it starts at the beginning, and all it sees is HTML, so it starts just passing that on as is to output. It reaches this PHP tag, and it says, okay, now I'm in PHP mode. I've escaped from HTML. Let me process what's in here. Okay, I found an echo statement, and an echo statement outputs text. So it says, what is it outputting? It outputs hello world in an H1 header tag. So what it's going to do is it's going to add that to the HTML up here that it's already passed along. Once it finishes processing the echo statement, it's going to exit out of PHP mode back into HTML mode, and then pass everything else it finds onto the output. So it's going to add it on to the hello world text that it outputted, as well as these intro tags. So if we actually were to go and view this web page, let's start Firefox. And I have it saved in the Lecture 4 directory of the Intro to PHP directory that we talked about in the last lesson. And if we view hello world.php, we see the message hello world. And actually, if we go ahead and view the page source for this, let me blow it up a little bit here, we can see that the HTML code was just passed on as is by the PHP interpreter as expected. And instead of the PHP code fragment in between the code delimiters right here, or the PHP delimiters, it's been replaced with the HTML itself that was output. So this PHP section up here is replaced with the HTML that's code section output. And that's how PHP interprets the file and goes into and out of HTML mode. And as mentioned, you can do that as often as needed. So as an example, we could actually add another header statement here in HTML mode. We're in HTML mode right now because we're not between the PHP delimiters, and we'll just call it second heading. Close the header statement, and begin another block of PHP code using the opening and closing tags. And I'm going to create another echo statement, which is just echo followed by a space, followed by a quoted piece of text. And in this case, I'm going to create another header and call it, and have it output the message second PHP block. And end it with a semicolon. Now if we save the file and we go to view it, what we should see is the code up here outputted as before. When we leave the PHP code, we'll enter back into HTML mode. So this is, we should see this statement just as is in our HTML, the HTML source code. And this PHP code is going to do the same thing as up here. It's going to output another piece of text. So let's go ahead and view this in our web browser again. We've saved it and we refresh the page, and now we have the three different headers. And if we go and look at the page source, let's blow it up again, we can see the HTML opening and closing tags and the body tag. We can see the original HTML output by our first PHP code block. And if we look back at the source code file, we can see the second heading here that was output as is by the PHP interpreter because it was in HTML mode. And then again, the second echo statement right here was simply output and added to the rest of the output that the PHP had generated along the way. Finished off with the closing tags, and it reached the end of the file. So that's how PHP works going into and out of PHP mode. And we're going to be using that all throughout this course, and this is sort of a basic example. So I'd like to introduce you to another homework challenge that I'd like to have you do. Again, it's another hands-on opportunity to work with PHP code. And what we'd like would be to have you recreate the Hello World example or the Hello World script that we did in this class by hand on your own. Go into Open PSPad, type everything by hand, and it may have the tendency to want to copy and paste, but the idea is you really want to code the text yourself, because you'll learn about making mistakes. You'll learn that maybe you forgot how to write the PHP closing tag correctly. Maybe you left off the question mark or something. Maybe in your echo statement you forgot to put quotation marks around your text. So I really encourage you to go ahead and code the file on your own. Then you should save the file as helloworld.php, and I want you to save it in the appropriate folder of your Apache document root, so that you browse to it at this URL right here. And the reason I'm having you do that is, again, to reinforce what we learned in the last lesson, which is learning how the local file saved on your computer within the document root, below the document root, map to localhost URLs. And as you go along the way, see if you make any mistakes. You might see some error messages, and try to figure out maybe where you went wrong with your code, if you didn't save it in the right spot. For example, if you're having trouble viewing it, or if you're getting an error message from PHP. Also, be sure to make sure that Apache is properly started, and that you appropriately escape in and out of HTML using the PHP delimiters. And also, if you make any mistakes, PHP will give you error messages that have a line number listing where the error was made. And so you can go back to your source code. Maybe it says there's an error on line 11. Maybe we left out this initial quotation mark here. So actually, if we go and run this again, we'll get an error that there was an error on line 11. We can go back to PSPad, and the way you do that is you have to turn on line numbers in PSPad, and then that way you can see that on line 11, this is where your error was. You can go back in, add the quotation mark, save the file, and when you reload it, everything should work as before. So that reaches the end of today's lecture. Thank you for watching edutator.com, and we look forward to seeing you at the next lecture.